This program is brought to you by Emory University.
What I will want us to do together for the short period that we have is to interact together after I might have given an introductory statement for about 10 to 20 minutes. I've chosen to discuss with you what I call Africa in the 21st century. And I choose that as a topic because to me it encompasses all that we may want to say about Africa. Because of course Africa cannot go into the 21st century without its history and its past. Whatever that history and that past may be, it, of course, will have implication for the present, and the present will have implication for the future. So the journey of Africa so far has political history and political situation, economic history and economic situation, social history and social situation. I will not dwell too long on the past. Of course, in our interaction, if you want us to dwell on any aspect of this, we will do. The situation of Africa at independence some 50 odd years ago was really a situation not of development. It's a situation of, well, to a large extent, of exploitation. And the African leaders at that time wanted to move from exploitative regime to what you may then call development regime. But almost all of them had no experience or training in the new venture they were going into. I just illustrate this lack of experience or training by the story that Julius Nyerere told me. Julius Nyerere of Tanzania contested the election and he won. His party won. And when his party won, he became what they call chief minister with the colonial governor general still in place. And the training he had, the first day he went to the office as chief minister, was his permanent secretary, his chief civil servant, coming to him and saying, "Mr. Chief Minister, if you are going to write a minute or anything to the Governor General, you start with YE. You make your point succinct, short, to the point, and then you initial and date. From that time on, everybody that Nyerere wrote minute or note to, he started with YE. Until he wrote one to his permanent secretary, YE permanent secretary. And the permanent secretary rushed to him and said, look, Mr. Chief Minister, there's only one YE. And the only YE is the Governor General. Nobody else is YE. It was then that Nyerere asked, what does YE mean? It means Your Excellency. It's laughable, but I just want to illustrate the lack of training, the lack of preparation, the lack of experience that underpinned the achievement of independence. So, and that was really what we had to cope with. Added to that, of course, is the situation of the Cold War. And we were torn between, should we look to the West? And because the West was where our leaders got their independence from, they were not really keen. Did they look to the East? Now, what was there to be admired from the East? So these were the situations that we found ourselves up to almost the first half a century of our period of independence. So at the turn of the century, at the end of the 20th century, we have not achieved as much as the attainment of independence seemed to have promised. And we, as Africans, leaders, started questioning ourselves. What had gone wrong? As I said earlier, the Cold War had been an issue. The lack of experience, lack of training, an issue. The leadership that we had was also an issue. So we decided, look, what are the new things on the horizon that could help us? One was the end of the Cold War. The end of the Cold War was useful. Two, the emerging situation in Southeast Asia was also helpful. We got encouraged, we got to be encouraged by the situation generally in Europe and America. And we then thought what really was needed. What was needed was, one, we had to rethink. It could no longer be business as usual. Two, we have to think of reforms, particularly judging by what has happened in other parts of the world, other regions of the world. where there are success stories and where we could also try to adopt what has gone well. So at the turn of the century, four things happened. One, new leaders have started to emerge in Africa. The like of Thabo Mbeki, without being immodest, my good self, who, by virtue of their exposure and the upbringing, were ready to venture out for reforms. So we continentally we embark on changing the OAU to AU with a different charter or constitutive act. The AU talked of no interference in the internal affairs of one another. AU didn't think of that. AU believed that there can be intervention because you have no right to treat your own people in the way that they should not be treated. AU concentrated more on non-political issues, economic issues, peace and security, social issues, more than the OAU. So we had AU emerging at the turn of the century, at the beginning of the millennium, with being a different animal from OAU. We also took the reform or transformation of OAU beyond the political. We have what we call NEPAD, which was a program of AU for economic and social development. OAU didn't have anything like that. And as I said, AU took security, conflict resolution, conflict prevention as very fundamental. Governance, fight against corruption, good governance, and of course economic matters and issues, and social matters and issues. NEPAD was a program, and out of NEPAD we have something that was unique, African peer review mechanism, APRM, which allows African leaders to peer review themselves, to look at the report of each country and give objective and positive criticism, and of course with a follow-up program. We did not stop at the continental reform. We went down to sub-regional reform, the 5 sub-regions of Africa: North, West Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, and Southern Africa. And we in West Africa, ECOWAS, we move the 14 countries closer in economic development, ease of movement of people, goods, and services, and money, and we were moving towards economic union of West Africa. We did not stop at that. We went down to national level. There were a number of reforms that were carried out at the national level in public service, in governance, in service delivery, in fiscal reform, and all that. Take, for instance, in Nigeria, our reform earned us debt relief of over $20 billion. And the balance we paid up. These reforms, both at the national and at the sub-regional and continental levels, were supported by our development partners. There was another thing that we must not lose sight of as we come into the new century, new millennium, new decade, and that is the emergence of the BRIC, China, Brazil, Russia, and India, and their influence, particularly in the economic sector in our part of the world. Now that is the way we have moved on, and the result of this has been more democracy in Africa. It has been economic progress of more than 5% GDP growth. In Nigeria, we had an average of, for the time I was in government, particularly the last 4 years, an average of 7.5% growth, over 7% in agriculture. And we have a situation where Africa decided that, look, any government in Africa that did not come out through constitutional means will not be accepted as a member of the AU. So, as of today, the position is that politically, Africa is more democratic. Politically, Africa has, by and large, better governance. We are not where we should be yet, but we are making progress. Economically, we have 2/3 of our countries making progress at the rate of 5% or more GDP per annum. We have less conflict. We still have some that need to be addressed, but more importantly, even addressing whatever may be our problems, Africa is more directly involved than before now. For instance, the issue in Liberia, it was Africa that went in and dealt with it before the UN came in. The issue in Sierra Leone, the same. Even Darfur in Sudan, the same. The AU had something that we never had before, what they now call Council for Peace and Security, which is modeled more or less on the UN Security Council. So where do we need to go from here to make greater progress? We need integration. Africa needs to be integrated. Dealing with 55 countries by those who want to do business in Africa will not be as easy as dealing with one entity, even though the population of Africa is about the population of China or India. And when you want to deal with India, you deal with one country, or when you want to deal with China, you deal with one country. Two, there are still areas that we need to, in the economic, in the political arena, we need to get rid of seat-tight presidents. They are becoming vanishing species, but the few of them that are still there, we must gently move them out. The Arab Spring has helped in a way. We hope that there will be no Middle Africa Spring or winter, but we need to see that. Another area where we need to is move a little bit more is in the area of economic reform. Economic reform still costs more and it's too long to register a company in Africa, almost all African countries. Although the return on investment is great, varies between 20 to 25%, even in some cases 30%. But you need to be able to do business expeditiously. Now, having said that, let me end on this note that I am a farmer, and that means that I'm in some form of business, agribusiness. And I do know that return on investment even in agribusiness in Africa is better than anywhere else in the world. And land is there, people are there. We do need, of course, financial resources to be able to turn the land and the people to profit, and that we need to do. I think I will stop here and then take questions and answers.
YE Baba. Most of the students here are doing economic development in Africa and I really want to do something for Africa. They have projects, they want to think about new projects for Africa. Instead of asking you some questions, I want to give them the floor to ask you questions. Is that okay, President? Mr. President? Who wants to? Sam, you want to have a question? Sam Kammer.
Hi, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us today. My, I guess, just initial question is, you seem to push for some sort of unified front from an economic standpoint. How might we incentivize countries in Africa to participate in such a, what sounds like a great idea, but I seem with 55 countries, as you put it, rather difficult to get everyone to have buy-in to that one sort of universal idea of what a united African economic front could look like. So do you have any ideas about how that might look?
Yes, thank you very much. The African leaders, as part of the AU, have agreed that the building blocks for the integration of Africa politically, economically, and socially will be the regional economic communities, the 5 that I mentioned. And of course, to build the building block for the regional economic communities will be the national entities. Because take West Africa, which I believe is the largest, you are dealing with 14 countries, and it's easier to deal with 14 countries of ECOWAS in West Africa than 55 countries of the continent. And then, of course, when you are dealing with fiscal policy, monetary policy, trade policy, it's easier to have 14 countries, which or movement of goods. And even when we were talking of, yes, can we have one currency in West Africa? And they have decided they will have one currency. They have even decided what name they will call it, ECHO. They have also decided what will be the convergence terms that they have to arrive at to be able to get that one currency. I think they have about 4 or 5 convergence conditions. So the way to go is the way of regional economic communities. And well, if you have 5 doing more or less well, it's easier to bring 5 together than to bring 55 together. That's
You mentioned the emergence of BRIC countries experiencing rapid economic growth and that sort of changing some dynamics in Africa. Why is it that you think that those countries have, I guess, experienced disproportionately large economic growth, whereas Africa is kind of late in coming to experience that growth? And what could be done by outside actors, specifically the United States and Europe, to incentivize and help Africa to develop?
I'm sorry, I'm a little bit hard of hearing. What incentive should we give to Africa? Please still give it to him. I want to make sure I get him correctly. What incentive should Africa give, or we, or?
Well, there have been a lot of other countries, as you mentioned, that have experienced a lot of economic growth. For instance, Brazil, India, China.
Yes.
Africa, in the same time period, has experienced some economic growth,
But not enough.
Not as much.
Okay.
What is it that the West needs to change in the way that it deals with Africa to help Africa grow more?
Okay. Well, I think I said that. Reform. Those countries that have experienced growth, whether in Africa or outside Africa, in the last 25 years, have gone into great reform. They haven't been doing business as usual. I was in charge of Nigeria, and the last 5 years out of the 8 that I was at the helms of affairs of Nigeria, our rate of growth went from 2.5% before I became president to as much as 7.5% of the last 4 years. And it's nothing other than reform. It's the same people who have been inhabiting Nigeria that were there. It's the same soil that we have had, that we have. There is nothing that was different other than 2, leadership and reforms. Now, the leadership must be right. And I believe that in those countries that have made progress, the leadership was right. Then that leadership must be reform-minded leadership that will bring about transformation. And you see the international community, the investing world, they are no fools. They sit down in New York, in Frankfurt, in London, and look at the situation. And when the situation is right, they move in. On one occasion, the governor of Central Bank of Nigeria phoned me one day when I was president and said, look, in one day we had foreign inflow of over $80 million in one day. Almost $100 million in one day. It can happen. And the way to look at it is that even if you take 300 days, working days, and you have $100 million, you imagine what that is that can flow in. So it's reform and making it easy for people to do business, creating a conducive environment for business to thrive, private sector.
I wanted to ask you about the state of education in Nigeria, and what's the state of educational opportunity right now, and what's the plan for Nigeria's future? Thank you.
State of education in Nigeria. Let me put it this way. When I started school, in 1945, there were virtually no government primary schools. They were all mission schools. By the year 1955, one of the three regions of Nigeria has established free primary schools all over its region. By the time I became head of state, we established what we call UPE, Universal Primary Education, throughout the country. It wasn't free, but in some parts it was free. When I became elected president, we changed it to UBE, Universal Basic Education. That is to move it from 6 years compulsory education for primary to 9 years. And that is matched by secondary schools. It's also matched by universities. By the middle of the 50s, when I was looking for a university to go in Nigeria, there was only one university in Nigeria. Today, there are about 130 universities in Nigeria. And those universities, the quality compares with the quality of education anywhere in the world. We have Nigerians who leave Nigerian universities and go all over the world, and they perform very well. I have a former minister of mine here, Leslie Obiora, Leslie, did you have a part of your education in Nigeria?
I got my professional degree. Maybe if you could come here.
Yeah.
Up until I got my primary education in Nigeria, got my secondary education, went to the University of Nigeria and read law. Then I came to Yale Law School and Stanford Law School and got my master's and my terminal degrees, and I now teach in the United States.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, I'm a student in the Masters in Development Practice program. And so my question, I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit and talk about what you think the role might be for NGOs in relation to economic development, either in Nigeria or in Africa in general.
Well, NGOs are very important. In fact, now what we are talking about is public sector, private sector, and civil society. And of course, when you talk of civil society, you talk of NGOs. And the three of them have to work together for the development of Africa. I do not believe that one should substitute the other. It's just a question that they all have to work together. And NGOs have a role that they have to play, but they should not see the public sector as, let us get rid of it. No. Or the private sector as, oh, those people who reap from where they do not sow. No. I think the greatest thing that private sector sows is entrepreneurship. And if you are an entrepreneur, then you must be able to get something for your risk taking. And so the private sector is as good as the public and the civil society.
Hi, I just want to thank you for coming today. I had a question for you about like women's roles in Africa right now, and with regards to like the UN resolutions 1325 and 1820, like how you see women playing out in like conflict resolution and in the economy, and just like maybe how gender roles are changing in general.
I think here some countries have made greater progress than others. I would be the first to admit that. Take a country like Rwanda. They have more women in their parliament than they have men. That is, of course, as a result of the situation in that country, partly, and as a result of the leadership encouraging the gender equality. And we in Nigeria, we haven't moved that fast, but I believe we will get there. For instance, in my own party, if you are a lady contesting election at any level, you don't have to pay anything. Whereas as a man, there's certain payment you have to make. In spite of that, we haven't got as many as legislators, female legislators, as I would want to see. But I believe it's a matter of time. There's still also, because there's differentiation in Nigeria, in the northern part of Nigeria, the northern part is more masculine-minded in the society at all levels of society and in all walks of life than in the South. But it is coming up. We are trying very hard to meet the Beijing quota of 1/3. In fact, the president of Nigeria said he will meet Beijing, and he nearly did. I think out of 40 ministers, he's got about 12, which is close enough to Beijing. It's done better than I had 9 out of 38 or so when I was there, but he's done a little bit better. So we're moving.
The last 2 questions.
Okay. Good evening. You spoke earlier about reforms being sort of the hope for, development in African countries, but a lot of governance in African countries is poor, and they're not passing reforms that need to be passed. So my question is, what do you see as the hope for the people in, changing their malevolent governance? There's the rise of the Arab Spring now. Do you think that a change in governance can only come through, violent rebellion, or is there some other strategy that citizens can employ?
Well, I think there's still no substitute for reform. Now, some governments will move on reform faster than others, but nothing succeeds like success. When you see your neighbor succeeding and you are lagging behind, if you do not wake up, your people will wake you up. And that's the way I see it. If, for instance, Nigeria is going ahead and Republic of Benin, who is our neighbor, is not going ahead, the people of Republic of Benin will start asking their leaders in Republic of Benin that, look, what is the matter with you? And that's the way I see it. And in fact, it's already happening that way. It's already happening that way. Because, for instance, the so-called Arab Spring is because people say, look, they want certain reform. They want to get involved. They want to have a stake in not only in the economic but also in the political life of their country. And that reform, when it didn't come out, it didn't come up in time, it's forced on them. So it's better you get it before it's forced on you. If you don't make it happen, it will be made. You will be made to make it happen, or it will happen without you.
Good evening, Mr. President. I'm just going to talk a little bit about my project with my friend Brent over here. I'm sorry if this is not specific enough or too specific, I'm sorry. But my question, I guess, is in 2 parts. Like, how do you see how do you analyze the need for a good internet service in Africa? And from our research, we found that Nigeria has one of the best internet, like over 44 million people with access to the internet. Like, how do you see, what does Nigeria have that, for example, Ghana doesn't have in terms of like infrastructure or companies or whatnot?
Well, I tell you what Nigeria has and Ghana doesn't have. Nigeria has a population of 165 million. Ghana doesn't have that. So that is the first thing. And when you are looking at the market, now the population counts. Internet, you talk about, what do they call this? When I was the president and we were giving license for this, I was told that in 5 years, they will not have more than 20 million. And we started giving the license about 6 years ago. They have now reached 85 million. 85 million lines on mobile. Of course, there are other things that must go with the population: infrastructure, power, energy, electricity, transportation, human capacity that will do that. But once you have the infrastructure and the population and the education that we have talked about, then the sky is the limit. The sky is the limit. Yeah.
Mr. President, thank you so much.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.